So welcome to the Man of the Law podcast. I'm here with Aaron JANNETI. He is the co-owner of Endeavor DCF. He is the creator of Knife Control Concepts, and he will be in Chicago Saturday, February 3rd, 2024 at Maximus Muay Thai and Jiu Jitsu for a Chicago training weekend, which will include knives, wrestling, and self-defense. So that's really kind of wanted to push here. You're coming to Chicago. I live in Chicago. Got a lot of law enforcement and jiu-jitsu friends here. Wanted to kind of promote this. And just a quick quote, if you don't know who Aaron JANNETI is, BJJ Fanatics said he is one of the best modern-day self-defense specialists from Krav Maga, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, and more. Now that's a big statement. That's a big statement. It's a big statement. Those are big shoes to fill. So
let's hope I live up to that.
Yeah, we actually met at IBJJF. We were both competing in a tournament.
Yep.
And I recognized you at the weigh-in, and I was like, hey, we started talking and exchanged Instagrams, and I've been following you for a while. You got great stuff, very professional. And you're one of the best in the game, and it's a real pleasure to talk to you today. So first, just kind of brief, how did the martial arts journey started? It kind of seems like you started with Krav Maga, but if you could just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So Krav Maga was the main starter for me. I was actually in college. I was at Ohio State University, and just fell on a bunch of bad luck. Grandfather passed away, couldn't pay for college. A bunch of bad stuff was happening. So I knew I needed to find an outlet for 20-year-old rage at the moment, and I happened to see a commercial for a Krav Maga studio in the area. So I went to that gym and never turned back. I took an intro class. I signed up that night, and I was there 6 days a week. So I started in Krav Maga. He also had recently brought on a BJJ instructor, blue belt level, under the old Dave Meyer system. But still, it was an introduction to jiu-jitsu. So that was my first introduction to jiu-jitsu. He happened to have classes there, which was awesome. Then within probably 2 or 3 months after joining, he brought in a gentleman by the name of Jason Lai, who started teaching Muay Thai classes. So I came for Krav Maga. I ended up learning jiu-jitsu, getting an introduction to, some really good kickboxing. Right behind us in the same exact parking lot was the original Rogue Fitness. Before anybody knew who they were just a gym. Now, they make all of the strength equipment for everybody, for everywhere. But Bill Henniger at the time, he had, about a 3,000 square foot gym in Gahanna, Ohio. So I started training over there. It was in the same parking lot. So I'd go do fitness classes over there, and then I'd come next door and I'd fight. I was 20, so I had energy to do whatever the hell I needed always. And that's really what started it for me. I ended up, I was there so much, the guy that owned the gym was like, hey man, do you want to learn how to coach? And I was like, hell yeah. And then within a year, he had opened up a new facility, so a second location on the other side of town. So Gahanna's on the east side, and it was on the west side. So he asked me, do you want to be the program director over here, help run the facility, and do some of the classes? And I was like, certainly. So I pretty much within a year of that happening, about a year and a half after finding Krav Maga, had decided to leave college. I was a landscape architecture major at the time, and run this secondary gym full time. And so, that was end of 2008, early 2009 at this point. And I've done that ever since. And the one thing that was really good about the gentleman that got me set up, Mark Slane, he was really big on getting outside of what you train. So a lot of us, we have a tendency, we find karate, we stick with karate, and karate is the way, and we find jiu-jitsu is the way. And Krav Maga was no different for most places. It was like, we have all the answers. Mark wasn't like that. Mark was very much, that's why he brought in a jiu-jitsu guy and brought in a kickboxing guy, and he started introducing us to firearms instructors and all that type of stuff. So he had ingrained that in me early on in my martial arts career, and that stuck. So that's, I think one of the things, I know one of the things that's really helped me to become a very good coach and to be able to relate is I'm constantly going out and learning from other people. I don't care what it is. I've done, since I started doing this, I've done traditional martial arts. I've done Kali. I've done boxing, kickboxing, wrestling. I've done various types of firearms training. I've done, I mean, everything, even things I'm never going to use, like team tactics, CQB. You know, I'm a civilian. I'm not going to be, you know, lining up on a
Clearing
door anytime
rooms,
soon.
right?
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
exactly. So
SWAT, clearing rooms, right? But that's
yeah,
cool stuff, though. It's fun stuff to learn too.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's fun as hell, but it's more importantly for me as a coach, you know, which is what I do primarily. I need to understand, like, if I do work with a group of law enforcement officers, I need to understand, like, what's your day-to-day job, like, you know, what's this look like? Have at least a little bit deeper insight into what's going on, instead of me walking into a place and being like, hey, I'm the martial arts guru, you know, shut up and listen to me. It puts you in a position where you can walk in and say, listen, I don't do your job. I know a little bit about it. I've taken the time to research a little. This is the information I have. I think that'll benefit you. Let me share it with you the best way that I can. And then let's figure out how it makes the most sense for your context. And that early on, like I said, with Mark, I think that was one of the most important things he instilled in us, was being able to see things from different angles and never imagining you have all the answers, which was pretty cool. So that's the probably longer than needed to be explanation of kind of how I got to where I am today, or at least how I kicked off my martial arts journey.
No, that's great. Yeah, because you know there was a lot of that I didn't know about you, and you know, looking at you now, you watch your Instagram, everything's very polished. Everything's, you know, you've been doing this for a long time, and people don't understand like the backstory, how it takes 10, 12, 15 years to, you know,
Oh
just
yeah.
of putting in the work, you know, late nights and all that stuff in with, you know, different collaborators too. And I kind of like how you said that too, because, you know, like we just work on jujitsu. I'm trying to bring fundamental jujitsu to law enforcement officers, really just the basics,
Yep.
and that they don't know: grappling techniques, framing, technical stand up. You know, our stuff on Friday nights is not that crazy, you know. But if I were to, like, you know, work on gun or knife defense and stuff like that, I think it is better to bring in somebody that works specifically on that, and do like a seminar or something like that. So,
Well,
which,
one of the things you said there that's important is you know, it's we're not doing anything crazy. It's just the fundamentals. But I mean, realistically, you know this at the highest levels of competitive
mhm,
grappling, but even in actual dealing with assault in any paradigm, as far as that goes, it's always the fundamentals. The better you are at
yes,
the fundamentals, then you
yes,
can ad lib the other stuff.
mhm,
If you lack the fundamentals, there's no, ad libbing. There's no flying by the seat of your pants. It's like, if you suck at the fundamentals, you're going to be in for a very bad fight. So the fundamentals is everything, man. And then you can say, just like you said, it's like, okay, I have solid fundamentals. I understand movement, getting off my back, staying on top. I understand getting outside of the elbows, angles. I've got a baseline of all this type of stuff. Now, okay, cool. Let's spin that to this very specific context. But it's way harder to teach somebody how to deal with a knife if they don't have the fundamentals. I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of people, when they see the KCC material for knife control concepts, they're like, why are you wrestling around with some guy with a knife? And it's like, you're missing the point. Like, I have to teach you the fundamentals of movement and control before you can do all the other stuff that you're imagining that you're going to do in this violent encounter. Like, oh, just going to draw my gun and
correct.
shoot them. Cool. They're already on you, stabbing you.
Mhm.
We're not trading stab wounds for shots out of my firearm right now. So stuff like that is just fascinating, that there is such a disconnect, at least in my experience, from what people imagine gun and knife defense, weapons defense, whatever, which is highly violent situations, and how somehow that's removed from fundamental understanding of control and striking and movement is very fascinating to me. I get geek out on that stuff, but
No, no, I agree with you. You know, you have to know the fundamentals. You're not just going to go in and do some crazy knife defense if you don't know just some basic grappling techniques and basic fundamentals. You know,
yeah,
we're literally teaching, you know, pummeling,
yep,
break fall, like things you think people would just, you know, assume you would know, but they do not know these things. And these are police officers, but it is the way it is. They don't get trained in this stuff, and, you know, they don't do it a lot. So it's really starting from scratch. And when I bring officers in and, you know, the break fall, technical stand up, pummeling, and they're like, you know, they're not really connecting the dots, but eventually they kind of see, you know, how the system works. You got to start, you know, with the basic fundamental stuff.
uh,
And, you know, and so that kind of leads me to like why, you know, with your vast array of stuff that you were doing, what led you into knife control concepts, and just to, like, I just want to specialize on just this one kind of area.
yeah. The easiest answer is that the knives are terrifying. They don't require a lot of skill. You don't have to worry about mechanical issues like, you know, malfunctions in a firearm and stuff like that. So it's not like it runs out of ammo, anything like that. And edged weapons, are prominent. They're everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So people get a lot of training with them, and even just and by training, I mean like you cut steak, you stab into things, you open boxes. Like we train with knives quite often, and opening up a box is really no different than opening up flesh, man. It put pressure and pull, stab in stuff like that, and that is it's terrifying. And in all of the exposure that I've had in Filipino martial arts, Krav Maga, different defensive tactics and combatives instructors, I never loved any of the answers, including the ones that we were coming up with. And that, to me, instead of going, well, let's just avoid that, I'm kind of like Simba and the Lion King. It's like if you tell me to stay away from the dark place, I'm kind of like, ooh, I'm intrigued. I want to know more about that spot. So to me, that honestly is what fuels us, and I think also keeps us in check, is the fact that we know that there is no easy answer to dealing with a blade, and it is very terrifying because there's not only the efficacy of the weapon, but also the psychology that it takes to hold on to a sharp implement and stab it into another human being, where you're actually physically part of that interaction. Like I can feel the knife go into you. I may get your blood on my hand. I'm in a close enough distance. That's a way different
violent
psychology.
personal attack. Yeah. Violent personal attack. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. The psychology behind that person is oftentimes significantly different than with a gun, where I'm doing it at distance, and maybe it started as a threat, and oh my God, I pulled the trigger, and oh shit, even I'm shocked in it. It's a little different when it's like I have this thing and I'm intending to do this thing. So it's terrifying. And I didn't love the answers that we were coming up with. And so it opened up the basic idea of, okay, well, realistically speaking, you just need to be, you need to be very good at fighting. You need to understand a high level of striking, a high level of wrestling. You need to understand the psychology going into it beforehand. You need to understand. So there's all these elements that go into potentially surviving a knife attack. With KCC specifically, we reverse engineer it in the regard that the first thing we focus on is the entanglement. So hopefully that's not what happens. And we get a lot of comments on that type of stuff. Like, oh, well, you should just run away. It's like, absolutely 100%. If you can run away, if you're physically fit enough to run away, or you're in a place where you can run away, then absolutely run away. There's a lot of cases where that's not the case. Okay, now you can't run away. You don't have your gun in your hand yet. Whatever it is, all of these cases, and this person's on top of you and they're stabbing you, there's a skill set in that moment, and that's, in my opinion, the most terrifying part. Absolutely. They're attached to me and they're stabbing. So we reverse engineer it in regard to, we want to solve what we think is the hardest problem first, and then once we solve the hardest problem, it makes all these other pieces simpler to attach onto. So now, how do I strike? How would I maybe block or parry? How do I get weapons access? So we just reverse engineered it. We focus on, instead of focusing on the entry, which is where a lot of martial arts are going to go with it. Hey, the knife is drawn in this way, or it's stabbed in this way. We went, look, they're attached to you. I don't care how the knife came into play. Let's resolve this problem. Let's get really competent in this area, because competency will fuel confidence. And then once we have that competency, we can start to go, okay, now let's look at all these other pieces. And so that's what got us obsessed with knife control concepts, or the idea of dealing with the knife. And then over time of teaching, I used to teach very traditional Krav Maga, outside defense and counter, followed by this grip, followed by this disarm. And I taught that for years. And I was good at it that I could pull off some higher level things that are less than pragmatic. But in a lot of cases, I could pull it off. But again, like I started when I was 20, I trained full time. I've been doing it 10, 15 years. So I can do that. The average human being is not doing that, especially the average law enforcement officer. You're not putting in 3 a days, 6 days a week. So it came down to, what is the most important thing that they need to learn that's going to solve the most problems. And then once we have that anchored in, then we'll plug these things. And it always came back to the entanglement, because if you foul the block, or if you weren't able to stuff the draw, or if you weren't able to get distance, what we always saw was a populated shit show where somebody was latched onto somebody, sewing machine the hell out of them, and they just lacked the common wrestling acumen to be able to handle the situation.
Sure.
So with KCC, our first version, we call KCC 1. We keep it very simple. KCC 1 is all control. It's stand-up wrestling day 1. On day 2, it's all ground mechanics. So top control drills against a supine and pronated attacker, different ways to grip and move and transition, snap downs and transitions between the two. We're teaching them how to move, how to control. We're teaching them fundamentals. And more importantly, we're teaching them actually how to practice it. Because that's I think the missing link in a lot of things is like, instead of
the
saying
repetition, hey, right? The repetition.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And on top of that, like, take jiu-jitsu, for instance. I can't even list the number of techniques inside of the realm of jiu-jitsu. There's thousands upon thousands and nuances, exactly. Right? Well, if I come to you and I say, hey, listen, here's your 13 knife defenses. Okay, it's like, well, which one do I practice and how do they tie together? What we try to do is we try to teach people, like, look, I know you're not going to put 2 hours a week into knife defense. It's just not going to happen. You have a job, you have kids, you have a life. But if you're training twice a week, whether it's in the gym or whether it's at a jiu-jitsu studio, here's a 5-minute drill you can do as a warm-up every time you go to train that is going to enhance your ability and survivability in a knife encounterment in a knife entanglement if you find yourself there. 5 minutes on top of what you're already doing is way more acceptable than trying to add hours upon hours to your training regimen. So we identified what we thought was the biggest problem in the actual execution. And then what we know is the biggest problem, which is training time. The more I train, the better I'm going to be. Just end of story. There's no way around that. So how do we solve those two problems? And so we built a system not only around the core concepts and movements that we believe are important, but also around realism and how do we get people to actually consistently train this type stuff realistically, without just saying like, hey, I'm going to bail on everything I do and all of a sudden I'm just going to bow to KCC. It's just not going to work that way. So once we get them doing that, then we start plugging everything after that. Then KCC 2, we start talking about striking and, limb destruction, not disarms and things, but how do I actually get to the positions I need to get to? And how do I deal with shirt grabs and frames and all that other kind of crazy violent stuff that criminals are good at? It's very natural to them. They've practiced it in a lot of cases. Us everyday civilians and, the law enforcement that maybe is a little greener, newer into it and haven't had enough touch-ups, they're just not used to those dynamics yet or the rules of violence. So we then slowly expose them to those things.
No, that's great. Great explanation too. And that kind of goes into my segue of the law enforcement part, for your Chicago seminar. You were talking about like some people don't have the option to run. Guess what? 90% of my calls are domestic calls. They're usually in confined spaces, small apartments where we don't know where the knives are, domestic situations where there's drugs and alcohol involved. The situation's usually pretty volatile. I've seen plenty of people, get stabbed and plenty of people with knives, and it's a scary situation. And with, police officers, when you're in a confined space or a smaller home that you don't know, and somebody comes at you with a knife, guess what? You might not have time to, deploy a taser or even pull your firearm. You might be hands-on grappling that person right away with a knife in their hand. And that's why I think, taking one of your courses would be fantastic for law enforcement, because it's going to teach you those things if you need it. Yes, perfect situation, you back away, leave the situation. But police officers don't have that option. We have to deal with the subject one way or the other. And that needs to happen. We can't just turn our back and go. And we deal in a lot of small places, and it could be a violent attack. So when I see you doing your system, I think it's just, it could be perfect for law enforcement officers to take and get some of these skills. Hey, it might never happen, but guess what? My first call tomorrow, I could be dealing with a guy with a knife in a small apartment that's, and have to deal with that. So I kind of understand the benefits. So, if law enforcement officers do attend your seminar on Saturday, I will be there. Just some of the benefits and, the things they can take away from Saturday's seminar.
Yeah.
I know you're doing 3 different seminars, with the clinch and some with the knife. So if you could just, kind of explain the benefits for Chicagoland law enforcement officers to take your seminar on Saturday.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I'm coming in town for 2 days. Good friend of mine, Dave Heinemann's bringing me up there. He's in the area, another phenomenal resource locally.
Yeah, I watch him on Instagram too. Great stuff. He's very good guy. Yeah.
So he's bringing me up there, and we wanted to kind of hit a couple of different things. So what we decided on was we would do a full day knife seminar, and that's what Saturday is going to be. Saturday will be 7 hours. No lunch break built into that. There will be like little mini breaks and things like that, but it's 7 hours. Let's get the work done. And then if you want to go out and enjoy some beers and a big meal afterwards, like, let's go for it. But anybody who's been to long training seminars, the after lunch session is always harder than anything that happens like beforehand. So,
because you're tired.
Push through. Yeah. You're tired. You had your meal and it's like, oh crap, I got to warm up again.
Yeah.
So the way that we're going to run the Saturday one, or the way I'm going to run the Saturday one, is it's going to have a lot of the KCC1 foundations, but it's almost going to be a spackling of all of the things that we're going to look at. So we're going to look at the stand-up control. We're going to look at the ground control. It's going to be a little bit of an abridged version of it. And then we're going to start looking at frames and shirt grabs, both from the attacker is grabbing your shirt or framing in certain ways, and also how do I use garment against attackers? How does that start to benefit me? Then we're going to start moving into concepts around like parries and arm stops, your basic kind of mid-range defensive options as far as like, oh, the knife is incoming. I don't have a linkage just yet. I can't get away just yet. How do I buy some time there? Then we're going to start into elements of striking. So now where does striking fit outside of the clinch? Where does striking fit inside of the clinch? And then the last hour or so is going to be a mini exploration and flow of how do we start to put all of these little pieces together. Now, specifically for law enforcement, you're looking at a couple of different things. First off, the control elements are always going to be, in my opinion, for law enforcement especially, the control elements and the way that we teach them are going to show you how to deal with, for the most part, any situation you get hands on for. We're talking knives specifically in our program because that's the focus we chose. However, a weapon in a hand is a weapon in a hand. So if I've got a subject that all of a sudden starts reaching into their pocket, I don't know if that's a gun or a knife or nothing because they're trying to just discard drugs or whatever it is. However, the control and the tactics and the way I'm going to manage the body and the way that I understand how to get around the body and to navigate and to shut down their systems applies more dangerously with a knife than anything else. However, it applies directly to a lot of those other elements. So the Greco-Roman stuff that we're going to do for stand-up and the top control positioning things we're going to do on the ground is going to directly tie into any type of situation where I need to control somebody, contain them, and then eventually any law enforcement officer that's in there and gets the time will all of a sudden start seeing like, oh, okay, this is where I have cuffing technique A or cuffing technique C, whatever that is, and you can start to tie in. That's one of the things that we always, a position we like to put ourselves in is that we're kind of the glue that ties all the random things that law enforcement is taught together in the middle. It's like, okay, well, I've got, my de-escalation tactics and, my verbal commands and things like that. And then I've got my higher force options as far as going to my taser, my gun, maybe, but whatever it is. And then I've got my, hands-on dealing with that. And then I've got blocks and things like that. And I've got cuffing techniques. But how often are we training the total linkage between all of them? How am I going from verbal commands all of a sudden to, I thought about going to my taser. Oh, the taser got dropped. We're in an entanglement. Now I'm going. And we're essentially kind of the roadway and the glue that starts to make everything go, oh, shit, I can get from here to here now. Oh, man, that didn't work for me. But now I have my foundation, which is all these grappling skills, which now I can transfer through to this next phase. So hands down, the grappling control positions that they're going to learn in the first about 3 hours is already, that right there, technically they could walk away from. Then you start looking at the shirts and the frames and the shirt grabs. There are very few knife attacks that don't take place with some initiation with the support hand. So if you look even statistically on dash cam footage, security camera footage, there's usually a punch and then a stab, a grab and then a stab, a holding of a shirt or something and then a stab. It's very rare this hand is just like sitting down by the side and I'm going this way. It happens, but this hand does things. So now we're starting to create a sensitivity around, okay, well, now where's this framing coming from? How do I deal with that? What does that start to look like? Again, applicable in a knife defense situation, but also applicable in I'm grabbing onto the officer as I'm trying to block them, as I'm trying to pull their gun out of their own holster, right? Like all of those things are going to start to tie together. So there's a lot of huge chunks in the first 4 hours that are going to be a big part of it. Now we start getting into striking, and that obviously is a touchy area. Now, me as a normal civilian that understands violence, I look at it and go, if he tries to stab a law enforcement officer should beat that guy into dust. Then there are civilian optics, which is you have the worst rules, in my opinion, around your job because we expect you to do this thing, but we expect you to do it inside of this rule set.
Correct.
But the bad guys are playing in this rule
set.
No
rules. Yeah. No rules. Yeah.
And it's fascinating. So
it's difficult. Yeah.
There's going to be an element where you're going to learn a lot about striking tactics, and those striking tactics don't need to be fancy, but they can be the pop in the nose that gets them to look this direction so that they take their mind off the knife for half a second, which allows me a position of control. It might be like the face jab with the hand that buys me the space I need to turn and run to then maybe get to higher force or get to cover and give verbal commands, whatever that is. So there's going to be a lot of tie into that.
When a person has a knife, that's, completely reasonable use of force too. It's absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Which again, oftentimes, and again, you know this more than me by any means, but in my experience, so undertrained, and I think to a certain degree because of the fear of the optics, is striking for law enforcement officers. But
absolutely,
if they can't control them, and you don't want them to shoot them, you got to teach them how to wrestle and hit, or else what the hell do you want them to do, right? So you have now these less lethal, better control options that they should be drilling and tying into. And it might be that one punch that saves your life, buys you the time you need to get away and or hold off until backup, whatever that is. Sure. So those elements are going to be in there. And then at the end of it, that last hour, exposure to it's not a real knife defense. No training's ever real. It's always fake in some form. However, it'll be a good exposure to a dynamic environment against a blade for them to start learning, what does that feel like? How do I respond to it? How does my breathing go? How do I start to regulate that back down so that I can focus
spike in adrenaline, the fight or flight, all that you got to work through. Yeah.
100%. And it gives them that exposure. And for people, law enforcement or not, for people that have yet to experience a training environment that is that dynamic, that is worth its weight in gold on its own, just to learn about yourself. How do I respond in these situations? And then you go to leave there and you have those pieces of the puzzle. So Saturday for the knife again, it's easy for me to say that, but in my experience working with corrections officers, law enforcement officers, these tactics are golden. And again, I'm going to teach them in a way where then hopefully they can take them back and they can go, hey, listen, I got a buddy I can train with. We're going to do 5 minutes before a shift and we're going to go through these flow drills. Top of mind, I head out on my shift for the day, and doing that will make a huge improvement on them. And then if they want to stick around for Sunday, Dave and I are then going to take weapons technically out of it. And then we're doing 2 mini seminars. So 2 little 3.5, 4 hour seminars. One's going to be all stand up related. The other one's going to be all ground related. How to get off your back, how to control and contain on the bottom. From the standing position, how to stay standing, how to stay on my feet the best I can. If I am taking them to the floor, I take them to the floor on my terms. And so building a lot of things around that, it'll be removed of the weapon, but a ton of great dynamics are going to happen in there. And again, Dave's another great resource for that as well. So him and I are going to co-teach on Sunday, and then I'm going to be teaching the Saturday block.
Oh, great. Sounds fantastic. And even when I watch your videos, in my mind, I say, okay, remove the knife. And watching your videos and you remove the knife, what I see is great jiu-jitsu, grappling techniques, all these things that are good ways to control another human being. So even if you remove the knife out of that, you're still learning these fantastic techniques to control another human being. And so even people get a little turned off, like, well, I don't know if I want to do all this knife stuff, but it's really, if you take the knife out of it and watch it, it's just it's a good mixture of all these techniques and control techniques that you could do without the knife in hand. And
that's it's one of our favorite secrets, is that when people do KCC, like we'll have a lot of like Krav Maga guys or self-defense guys or combatives guys that'll do KCC, and then all of a sudden they enjoy grappling and they're better at grappling, and it works. And I tell people all the time, our stand-up flows, it's all about getting around the elbows, getting to the back if possible, but learning how to do that. And I tell people all the time, I roll absolute division. I'm 170, maybe 175 pounds. Absolute division is not my friend in jiu-jitsu, especially as a brown belt. So, but I literally, my main stand-up tactics when I'm fighting somebody that's 100 pounds heavier than me is the same tactics that I'm using and teaching in KCC. I'm sure
as if they had a knife in their hand. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I'm not going to go inside to body lock takedown or double leg somebody that's 100 pounds heavier than me. No. I'm going to try to work to the outside, try to get to their back and try to break them down that way. And I've had a ton of success using KCC flow drills in a competitive environment on a brown belt level. And that's for the people that will pressure testing and is it applicable? That's the best I can do, unless I go into, the hilltop 10 minutes from where I live and see if somebody will try to stab me over some drugs and find out if it works. So.
Yeah, absolutely. The techniques are sound, with knife or without knife. And it's still, great jiu-jitsu and great grappling techniques, kind of a combination of both, and which could be used. So for law enforcement officers, looking to they have never done anything before, looking, if you're in jiu-jitsu and you've been training a long time, kind of add this to your fundamental stuff. And I'm looking forward to going, because it's going to be, a learning experience for me. I'm brown belt in jiu-jitsu, been training about 12 years, but I feel the same way. I've really just scratched the surface of the jiu-jitsu game and some of these other martial arts. And I'm really looking to, do more, get better, and bring that more to my students so they can get better too. And so if you're in law enforcement in Chicago, please join us on Saturday, February 3rd, 2024, Maximus Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu, Chicago weekend of training. It's 2 days. Check out Instagram at JANNETI Aaron. And is there any other sites we could check out?
Yeah, at Knife Control Concepts, and then knifecontrolconcepts.com. You'll find pretty much anything you need there.
So if you're in the Chicagoland area, join us there. I'll be there. I'm signing up. I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm a, Chicago police officer, always looking to learn some more tactics. And Aaron JANNETI, one of the best in the game, and very dedicated to what he does. And, one of the hardest working guys out there in the self-defense business. And it was a real pleasure talking to you. I'm glad you can, I got this little teeny podcast with a few hundred followers. So I'm so glad you could, jump on, and it was a pleasure meeting you back in Chicago. And, I look forward to, meeting you in February. So any last comments, Mr. JANNETI?
It was an honor coming on. I'm super pumped you reached out and asked. And again, it was really cool meeting you in Chicago. And then I got a chance to check out your page, and I was like, oh shit. Because it's fun finding people, especially in jiu-jitsu. They're like, oh man, they're doing cool stuff. And then get a chance to watch it. So no, man, it's an honor. I'm pumped. I'm excited to see where your podcast goes, and I'm looking forward to connecting and actually getting a chance to train, as opposed to getting rushed through the bullpen and talking to each other at IBJJF.
No, absolutely. So. Yeah. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you and, getting some training, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, thank you again for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Best of luck with everything.